Welcome to another Ranting Cast. I am Frank R. Curry, and as you all know, I am a hockey stat nerd, and with me today is a football stat nerd. On his Twitter, he calls himself a visualizer of football data, an appreciator of the analytics, and when he's not appreciating analytics, he's writing about the Cleveland Browns on the Orange and Brown Report. That is the Orange and Brown Report on Twitter at the OBR. But as Anthony Reinhard is with me, you see his Twitter is right there at Reinhard NFL. Anthony, how you doing today?
Very good, Frank. How are you?
I'm doing quite well. I'm waiting for football season to start.
Aren't we all?
Going go in the summer, and I'm winding down with hockey and everything. And I'm just like, all right, can it be September now? Can I get the Bills going on? And really, can I get to January for some playoff football? But that's the story for a different day. You do work writing for Cleveland. So how are you going with this summer with everything that's been going on with the Browns?
Oh, not great. I've been a Browns fan for most of my life. I grew up in northeastern Ohio. I've been following the Browns for a very long time. Not always my favorite team, but definitely in the last 10 years or so, they've been my favorite team. And I think I'm going to have to take a step back from the Browns maybe as a fan for a little bit. I'm going to continue writing about the team because I enjoy the site that I write for and the folks that I write with at the OBR. Really great site. Have to plug them everywhere I go. But yeah, I think my emotional attachment to the Browns is not feeling the best. I think the team is situated well in the future, maybe not so much this year. But it's hard for me to get behind a team that where I don't really like the best player. So it's been a rocky summer as a Browns fan, but I think it's more exciting probably to be a Bills fan. I think that they're looking pretty strong
Yeah.
this year in a lot of different ways.
Yeah, I totally get where you're coming from on that part. I think a lot of Browns fans are going to agree with you and be on your side when it comes to it's really hard to cheer for this team. And this is a team where we just saw a couple years ago finally break their playoff drought. They win a playoff game against one of their heated rivals in Pittsburgh and then almost beat Kansas City in the divisional round too. So you thought that really the sky was the limit for the Browns. I certainly felt that way, and I was so happy to see it. As a fan of a team that went through a playoff drought as well, and it's also still going on with their hockey team. I mean, seeing a team break their playoff drought and then go on a run is what run it warms my heart. I think it makes you feel really good, and then now they're almost right back where they were 5 years ago, it feels like.
Yeah, I think 2021 was a real gut punch compared to 2020 because I think it was kind of like 2019. They were coming off Baker Mayfield's strong rookie year. Felt like that was the year where they were going to be able to put a lot together and have a good season. Did not go so well, but then 2020 they break the playoff drought, win a lot of games. I was kind of saying through a lot of that year that I thought that they had maybe won a few more games than I think they ought to have. I think they kind of had some lucky bounces. A lot of stuff was going their way to hit 11-5, which is what they needed to make the playoffs. And then they had some really lucky bounces against the Steelers in the playoffs. Steelers basically spotted them 7 points on the first play of the game. And they had an insurmountable lead by midway through the second quarter, it was super fun as a fan. But as somebody who knew Kansas City was coming down the pipe the following week, it was maybe not as fun. I think a lot of people counted the Browns out of that Kansas City game pretty fast. There was a play at the end of the first half against Kansas City in that divisional game where it sure looked like the Browns had drawn a helmet-to-helmet contact hit on a fumble that happened at the goal line. Huge turning point. And then obviously Mahomes gets knocked out in the second half, and it feels like the Browns can climb back into it. That was tough to watch, but still a lot of fun to be watching the Browns play meaningful football in the winter months. So, I was going crazy during that period. It was the time that I felt most connected to the team was during that Kansas City game. And then, they played Kansas City in their opener in 2021.
Yeah.
Had a pretty strong showing, I thought, against them. I mean, that's a tough team to draw for your first game, but they had the Texans after that, which that's a nice game to come off of. Nice parachute game, I would call it. After a tough game, you get kind of a cupcake. But In that game, Baker Mayfield suffered a shoulder injury. A lot of people have different
Mhm.
opinions on how much that affected him for the rest of the season, but obviously was not the same player that he was in 2020, in 2021, and it was amazing how fast people turned on him. I remember how big of a conversation it was that Baker Mayfield would be extended that summer, and a lot of folks thought that the Browns were slow walking him unnecessarily, that they should have just jumped on his contract right away and beat some of these extensions that Josh Allen
Yeah.
and possibly Lamar Jackson are going to get. Figuring if you get in early, you pay cheaper, which I think is kind of what the Ravens are going to be dealing with now. They have to give Jackson probably a bigger deal than Allen got. Whether that's warranted or not is another question. But I was kind of in the camp of waiting on paying Baker Mayfield, and I think that ultimately proved to be a good decision that the Browns also agree with. So Baker's gone, but the Browns will see him in week 1, which will be very fun, I think, in a lot of
Oh,
different ways. Yeah. It'll be a very watchable football game from a
yeah.
listening standpoint.
Yeah, that's exactly it. It's gonna just be watchable. You're just gonna want to see. It's just Baker against Cleveland. That's it. It's not even the Panthers against Cleveland. It's Baker against Cleveland. Really, that's what that game's gonna be about. And it's similar with another Week 1 game. Before we get into some other stuff, Denver and Seattle, because Russell Wilson's going back to Seattle for Week 1. And they had some struggles to end his tenure there, but that one's going to at least be a more lighthearted, really. Russ is going to come in. He's just going to get a standing ovation for probably 10 minutes, 10, 15 minutes, maybe longer than that, you know. So
Absolutely, as he should. I mean,
and he
I think,
should.
yeah, he went out in Seattle in a classy way by
Yeah.
getting traded. It's the classiest way to go out is for your team to trade you without you necessarily asking for it, at
Yeah.
least not publicly. So that's a good way to go out with, it's the Stafford way to go out, I guess you'd say, of the
Yeah.
team you've been playing
Yeah.
for. So.
Yeah, exactly. I completely agree. So let's get into a lot of the main topics today. You are a football stat nerd. So as somebody who is a hockey stat nerd, I know websites where, and I know stats to use for, looking at evaluating players and everything. One of my favorite hockey site to use is called evolvinghockey.com.
Yes. Yeah.
If you're familiar with that site. Yeah,
Mhm.
it is a great site. I love using it just to look at stats and everything. Just to look at, okay, what is this player like? What is this player like? What is this player bad at? And I follow a lot of hockey stat nerds on Twitter as well, so they're sharing stuff, and I'm seeing that, and I'm looking at it as well. As somebody who hasn't dived into the football analytics, what are some things to kind of get you started on it?
Yeah. I first I'll say, I think football is maybe a little bit behind where hockey is right now. I think hockey has a lot of um, great information that's out there, and the NHL puts out a lot of information for folks that makes it easy to kind of, uh, you know, turn out your own stats and stuff like that. I think football is in a place where we have a lot of like team level stats that are available. I would call them top down metrics. But in terms of evaluating single players, there's really not as much as I think I would like to see in an ideal world at this point. I think we'll eventually get to a point where some of these more detailed stats that are less than just focusing on a single ball carrier or a full team become available. But I think Pro Football Focus is probably the best resource for holistic football information, which is to say, they chart a ton of stuff, give out grades, and I think folks are right to challenge PFF on some of their grades. They are
Mm-hmm.
probably subjective in nature, but they're the best we have for a lot of positions. And for offensive line and defensive line play, they do tend to hold up, which is to say their grades are consistent over time. I've tested them myself, and I can say that their offensive line grades are probably the best we're going to be able to get right now in the public space for evaluating offensive line play, which is great. It's something that prior to 2006 we wouldn't have had at all. I would say the best resource for public team level football information, though, is rbsm.com. Make sure you get the order right. You'll end up on some weird places if you get those letters wrong. Um, RBSM.com stands for running backs don't matter.com. It's the easiest way to remember it. The site is run by Ben Baldwin. He writes for The Athletic. He's kind of, I don't want to say he's like the head of analytics Twitter or whatever, but he's one of the foremost folks in the public analytics space, I think. On that website, you can get access to a lot of things that create the basic pillars of what the public would consider analytical dialogue. You get EPA, which is it stands for expected points added. Mm-hmm. This is a way of measuring the value that any play adds to a team. So you can kind of break this down into passing plays and running plays and give certain players more credit based on what happened during the play. As kind of a way to measure, on plays where Devin Singletary rushes the ball. This is the EPA and stuff like that. But I think it's a pretty useful and stable tool to measure team performance. It provides us with maybe the biggest insight that the public analytics movement has provided, which is that passing plays tend to be more efficient than running plays.
Yes,
in almost all situations.
Yeah, over the last year, that's something that I've definitely gotten. Is it's more efficient to pass on, especially like to pass on first down than it is to run on first down. Something like that. And I, as some, with the Bills, I have that is something that I noticed over the last couple of years when they, after they traded for Diggs and everything, they not only did they just start passing more in general, they start passing more to start plays instead of the old traditional run on first down, and you see a lot of teams doing that as well. So with EPA, is that kind of consistent with each play, or is that just more based on what the defense is showing and then how useful that play actually was going up against whatever the defense was giving them?
It's a great question. So EPA, I think, is more simple than people might think. Mm-hmm. Basically, on each play, we calculate what are called expected points, and that's the average number of points that the next team who scores will score based on the down, distance, yard line, time remaining in the half, and timeouts. I think that's it. So it's very formulaic, has nothing to do with actually what happens on the play even, which is kind of counterintuitive. So you calculate the expected points for one play, and you calculate the expected points for the next play, and the difference is the number of expected points that play added. So
okay.
I think kind of the best use case for it, and this is an example that I've used to explain it before, is that I think it assigns play value more accurately than some of the typical tools that folks might think of to evaluate a play. So if you have a 2-play drive where the Bills start the ball on the 75-yard line, 75 yards in the end zone, first play, Josh Allen throws to Stephon Diggs. He runs and is pushed out of the 2-yard line. Bills gain 73 yards on that play. Next play, handed to Devin Singletary. He falls into the end zone. So in terms of yardage, first play gets you 73 yards. Second play gets you 2 yards. That's probably not an accurate reflection of how valuable those 2 plays were. The passing play probably isn't, 30 some odd times more valuable than the running play. But if you look at points, only one play got you points. The other play didn't get any. Mm-hmm. So, you might think of the 73-yard pass is worthless because it didn't score. But expected points added, I think, bridges the gap between these two, where it would say that the passing play is maybe 3 times more valuable than the running play, which I think is a nice balance to strike.
Yeah, and I think even without the stats, you can see that, at least in that example, because if you're gaining 73 yards on a play, I mean, you're already setting yourself up for points regardless from where you are. And it just shows you that without this play, you're not close to getting points on the next play anyway. So yeah, I mean, that definitely play. I see how it would bridge the gap. And yeah, you kind of made the point of it's kind of sets up in a way. It sets up what the next play is. It kind of makes you really figure out, or just know, makes you think on how important play calling is in football, and just how important you gotta be able to get the play right based on the situation at hand. You got to be able to call the right play, and that's if you're an offensive coordinator, and that's when you're the quarterback as well.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think it places a special emphasis on that kind of stuff.
It's interesting. I'm on the RBSDM right now, just taking a look and browsing around, and it's interesting. Definitely, yeah, I definitely see these numbers. I'm just like, ooh, I got a lot to learn if I at least want to get a hand on these. I'm still trying to learn hockey analytics a little bit too. I've got it down pretty well, but there's always more to take a look at. It's very interesting. So after expected EPA, like what's another stat that people can look at to kind of help them get into the analytics of football?
Yeah, I would say that one that is kind of creeping up in popularity is maybe I call it pass probability over expected. Other people call it different things, but basically, you use a model to predict based on the down, yards to go, yards to the end zone, time remaining. A lot of the same what we call features as expected points added, to predict the probability that any play is going to be a pass play. And then you can kind of evaluate whether or not a team is running or passing more than expected. When you look at top line numbers a lot for runs versus passes, they can be misleading because a lot of teams, once they rack up a lead, will run the ball a lot.
Yep.
When you look at something like pass probability over expected, which can also take into account win probability, you can kind of account for when teams are in situations where they're definitely going to be run heavy, versus when they're kind of passing in situations where you wouldn't expect. So it basically just takes the average of the probability that you would pass on any play, and then subtracts the percentage of plays that you actually pass the ball. So a positive number indicates that you pass the ball a lot. Negative number indicates that you've run the ball a lot. It's especially helpful for kind of figuring out how pass heavy are really good teams. The Bills, I think probably if you looked at, and I don't know this for sure, if you looked at their pass run splits as raw numbers, they would probably be about the league average. But if you look at their pass probability over expected, one of the more pass heavy teams in the league. Mm-hmm. And this is because a lot of times they're playing with a lead, especially in the last 2 years.
Okay. So real quick, tonight's show is brought to you by Dinosaur Barbecue, John and Mary's. You can see that right in the bottom line. We're gonna take a real quick break, and we'll be right back and talk a little bit more about football analytics. Dinosaur Barbecue and John and Mary is always a sponsor of today's show, of the shows every week. Frank Arcuri with Anthony Reinhard at Reinhard NFL on Twitter. He writes for the official Orange and Brown Report. That's why I got to make sure I get it right. The Orange and Brown Report. He's a Cleveland guy. We talked a little bit Browns earlier, how we're feeling on them, and that everything that's all been discussed and whatnot. But we're really talking some football analytics just to kind of get you started on what you want to look at, what you want to know. One thing that interests me for analytics is how it affects gambling. I know not a lot of people like to talk about gambling. People feel like it's oversaturated now. In the Buffalo area, gambling was just legalized online last January, and almost immediately you saw commercials being popped up and sponsorships, a gambling site sponsoring things, and you're just seeing the advertisements everywhere on it. So I can see why people maybe aren't as much into it anymore as they would want to be. But I think this is where I think that they come hand in hand, and it makes it, if you're somebody who is a gambler who likes to bet on football, who likes to bet on any sport, looking at these analytics kind of will give you an idea of how the games are going to go and maybe where you should be betting. So how do the numbers that you see, how do the analytics that you're looking at, that you're writing about, how do they affect the numbers that sports books use?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure that sports books have their own kind of behind the scenes models that factor in a lot of the stuff that the public is just now really getting into. But I would say that more than anything, some of the public analytics measures like expected points added, which I would say is like it's a strong a team strength model as you're going to be able to find, really helps you cut through some of the noise of stuff like believing that home field advantage is especially important,
Hmm.
or I think you can kind of uh, better estimate the value of different starting quarterbacks, which are likely to move lines in one direction or another. Otherwise, I think it kind of the broader analytics movement is one that believes that um, maybe the only types of players that are going to move game lines are quarterbacks. So you'd be sharp to kind of bet against lines that move when a running back is out, or a receiver, or even a defensive end. So I think it can be very helpful to cut through some of the noise of maybe these narratives that folks like to talk about in terms of betting.
So it kind of almost makes it feel like if you're betting on a game, you're just looking at it all in a neutral aspect, and you're just looking at, okay, numbers, Matt, really it's numbers, and what their numbers are for the positions, mostly the quarterback position, but also, the matchup too, because you do have to take into account how good the defenses are as well.
Yeah. Yeah, of course. I mean, I think team strength is always something that you want to contextualize as best you can in terms of the players that are available.
You know, I'm I didn't want to have to look at it, but I'm looking at the Bills Chiefs game from last season, and the first thing that I see that popped up uh, is the total EPA, and I just see Mahomes is at 28.5 and Allen's at 26.2, and that bar is almost completely filled, and that's just insane to me.
Yeah, that was some of the most fantastic quarterback play that I've seen, especially down the stretch there, where it just seemed like both teams were scoring every drive for the last
Yeah.
5 minutes or so. It was really really outstanding play. I think that my personal opinion is that Patrick Mahomes is far and away the best quarterback in the NFL, but I think there's a second tier there that includes Josh Allen with even players like Rodgers and Brady, in my opinion, at their advanced age. So
I think that's fair. I think everyone can agree that Mahomes is the best quarterback in the league, and realistically, like he should be winning MVP every year because of how good he is. But you don't win MVP every year unless, I mean, Aaron Rodgers won it back to back years. But besides that, I mean, their EPA per play and play with both at 0.51. That just sounds insane. Just thinking
yeah,
about it.
yeah. I mean that basically means that every play that they did a pass, rush, sack, or scramble
Mhm.
with one of those two players, they added half a point more than you would expect. So in a game, your quarterback is typically going to get 40 or so plays like that. So and in this game, they got even more. So um, yeah, if your quarterback is able to even get, really anything above 0.1 per play is probably pretty good. Passing plays, which quarterbacks are mostly doing, tend to be a little higher than zero, and running plays tend to be a little lower than zero on average. So um, really anything in the positives is good, but passing plays are mostly positive, so you want to be above that kind of positive average on passing plays. But guys like Mahomes and Allen for a lot of their games are well above that 0.1 point, where I would say it's feasible to continue giving your quarterback chances.
Right. So zero just is average.
Yep. Yeah, zero is
Okay.
an average play where you might imagine over the course of a game an NFL team scores 24-ish points. So
Mhm.
if you had 0.0, you might be putting your offense on pace to score about 24 points.
Okay.
Kind of
Yeah,
thing.
that sounds, yeah, that seems about right. Sometimes in hockey analytics, like they'll have zero, which be the average, but then you might see like a higher number, like sometimes even just 50 be average as well. And if you're below that, it works the same way. Okay. Yeah, that does make a lot of sense. I might be browsing this site a lot heading into the season, just playing around with different things, just to kind of get an idea, man. Like that is it is a cool site, and looking at analytics is cool. It's fun. It's numbers that maybe you're not familiar with, but once you look at, maybe even just look at some box scores and just look at the numbers together and kind of see if how they relate, it might give you an idea of what these analytics are and what they'll say, and it gives you an idea of how these teams are gonna be and how they're gonna play and what their mindset is going in. I mean, the Bills are gonna be the same as they are this year as they were the last couple of years. They're going to be a pass first team. Even when Ken Dorsey is the offensive coordinator now, it's going to be pretty much the same from what we saw. The only thing that this offense has probably been lacking over the last couple of years, yet it is in the run game, but it's just efficiency in the run game. That's been their biggest problem. And everything in the passing game has always been fine. It's been great. Allen has been playing on an MVP caliber level for the last couple of years. And, Stephon Diggs is an all pro receiver. And now they're going to actually use Gabe Davis as the second receiver for the first time. So who knows how that's going to impact the passing game and how that's going to impact him. And we finally saw a breakout from Dawson Knox last season. So we'll see if he can continue that. And now adding James Cook into this offense, who would also help out in the passing game too. It really makes you wonder. The Bills might be one of the best passing teams in the league going into the year, and they got the numbers to back that up.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. I think maybe I think it is interesting to me that the Bills have struggled to kind of separate from the pack in terms of run game efficiency, when I think that we've seen other teams with elite rushing quarterbacks like the Eagles and the Ravens really kind of crack that ceiling open and have excellent rushing offenses. Where the Bills, if you take out some of the Josh Allen plays, not really running as efficiently as you think. I think that's one of the more interesting things to me, is how have failed to take advantage of the way that Josh Allen opens up a defense. But compared to what the Ravens have done, for instance, where it just feels like everything's open for everyone when you have Lamar Jackson back there. And I don't think that Allen, he's a different type of running quarterback than Lamar Jackson, but still possesses those same traits where, the defense has to defend against, both him and a running back that's back there. The Bills obviously ran a lot of personnel last year, a lot of receivers that kind of spread out the field a little bit. So I think I was doubly surprised then to see them, not really have a terrific year in terms of rushing efficiency. So I'm kind of anxious to see if it's a running back problem. I think that one of the big things that analytics folks kind of harp on is not investing in running backs, because the belief in the analytics community, and for myself also, is that the running game is more about scheme and offensive line play than it is individual running backs. So the Bills investing a second round pick in a running back after spending, in two and now three of the last four drafts, a day 2 pick on a running back is maybe not the way that you build up rushing efficiency. But it's still surprising to me that they've not kind of solved that as much as I would have expected.
Yeah, it's surprising to me too, especially as you mentioned. I mean, they've been taking running backs in day 2. It's like been 3 of the last 4 years, because Singletary was a 3rd round pick. Then the next year they took Zach Moss in the 3rd round, and then they just took James Cook now. The answer that I can give is their offensive line play has not been good in the rushing game. In the passing game, they're good. They're fine. Nothing really. They don't have to do anything to mess with that. But when they run the ball, their offensive line lacks. Then they can't get the certain blocks and open up the holes that you need for Singletary to get it to find that hole and get into the second seam and everything. But what they did do this offseason was bring back their offensive line coach who was here when Rex Ryan was the head coach. And when he was here, the Bills had one of the best offensive lines in the league. They were one of the best running teams in the league, and it helped that they had LaShawn McCoy to do that. But their offensive line was also rated one of the tops in the league at that time too. So by bringing their offensive line coach back, now maybe that's going to help impact the run game a lot more, in terms of it's going to make Singletary better, it's going to make James Cook better. And as I said before, I think James Cook was brought here to help in the passing game more than in the run game, in my opinion. I think he's going to be used a lot in screens. I wouldn't be surprised if there are times where he lined up as a receiver in the, maybe like in the slot or something like that. But I think he was really come here to be like a glore almost. And they also did this by drafting Shakir as well in the 5th round,
Yeah.
who looks
I thought that was
great.
a very solid pick. I mean,
Yeah,
Buffalo is kind of proving that, the one of the paths to retaining an elite passing offense is to continue investing in your receiving core. So,
exactly.
from
And
that standpoint, I think that was a very strong pick.
yeah. And one thing that I think these guys are going to be able to do is, you look at what Isaiah McKenzie had been the last couple years. Gadget player primarily. He'll line up in the backfield, he'll take like a jet sweep, or he'll take like a short screen pass and then just go. Now they're probably going to use McKenzie as the primary slot guy, if he might legit beat out Jamison Crowder for that third receiver spot, really. That's been a big talking point here in Buffalo, is that Crowder might get cut. But you have Shakir and Cook at this point now are just glorified hybrids, essentially. They have their positions at running back and receiver, but they can be used in the opposite aspects as well. I wonder if this is just as almost like it's a mix of their high prolific passing attack combined with what the 49ers are doing with what they've used Deebo Samuel for the last couple of years. I wonder if that's kind of maybe that is their mindset of where they want to go, and making the offensive line better, not even just through sheer roster turnover, but just from better coaching would help out with that.
Yeah, and I think that what the 49ers are doing with Deebo Samuel, I think is interesting, because I think that um, it. I guess if I think about Deebo Samuel and Cordell Patterson, and I see two guys who went from, I don't want to say went from, they're still, but Patterson, at least an okay receiver and kind of mostly a returner, to being a pretty good running back, and Deebo from being a solid playmaker at receiver to being a guy who can make plays everywhere. And I think that that's maybe even more of a feather in the cap of folks that don't believe that running backs are really making and breaking um, running games. I think you can kind of throw a lot of different guys back there. I will say, on the other hand, it's maybe a little more difficult than folks give it credit for to put a running back into the passing game and have them contribute as if they were a slot receiver. The Browns have a player, Demetric Felton, who they drafted as a running back out of UCLA last year. He played mostly as a receiver, was really good when they were able to get the ball in his hands. They schemed up some stuff that I thought was really great. Definitely a valuable player, but just maybe not a bread and butter receiver that can kind of run traditional routes. And I've kind of questioned that the ability of teams to turn running backs, or non-receivers in general, into effective receivers, because I think it is more of a specialized position than a lot of folks give it credit for. Obviously, you can have running backs come out of the backfield, and I think there's value in that. But the second you put them at receiver, I think defenses start treating them as a real threat to run deep routes. And there's a real art, I think, to creating separation in ways that players who are not naturally receivers, or have not been run routes like receivers for a long time, kind of struggle with. So I'll be interested to kind of follow along with what James Cook, kind of how his usage plays out for the rest of the year, as I'm kind of always interested in how these players that are in between positions on offense kind of play. I think Mike Gesicki is another one that I'm interested in. He plays a little bit of tight end, but mostly is a slot receiver. So it's kind of, on defense, you get a lot of guys who are kind of positionless that can play in the secondary or in the box. But on offense, it's more of a rarity to have a guy who can do a little bit of everything.
Yeah. All right. So I think we're going to just about do that for the show. Anthony, plug your stuff. Obviously, we plugged the website and everything, but what else you got going on?
Mostly for this season, I'm going to be writing an article a week for the OBR subscription site. Mostly, I write under the paywall for the most part, but a great site for Browns fans, for non-Browns fans to check out, to keep up with what's going on in Cleveland. I think we do some of the best Browns work anywhere. Other stuff I'm doing, I do a lot of graphs for all NFL teams. Cover pretty much as many teams as I can find the time for at my Twitter handle. That's where I'll tweet all of my graphs. So Reinhard NFL is where you can find me there. And yeah, that's about all I'm going to plug. So I appreciate you having me on, Frank. It was fun.
Yeah, this was really fun. We'll definitely have to have you on again when Buffalo and Cleveland play each other later in the year.
For sure.
All right, that's going to do it for the Ranting Cast. I'm Frank Curry, Anthony Reinhard with me. Thank you again for coming on today. Football season's coming up. Bills Rams September 8th. We're all ready. We're all ready for it, really. We'll see what we do with the show during football season, and then hockey season's coming up as well. So until then, we'll